The first story I'm going to be reading is Church in the Woods by Outworlder39. I grew up in Ohio in the 70s, and me and my childhood friend Joe were outside all the time we could manage it. Joe lived on a farm that bordered a pretty big forest, and my parents would drop me off in the morning and we'd stay in the woods all weekend. We'd only come out for school. We loved pretending we were frontiersmen. We'd build shelters, traps, practice making fires with sticks, the whole 9 yards. When we got to be in high school, we got this notion to pull a Stand By Me. This was based on the movie of the same name that had just come out. The idea was that we would walk the railroad tracks out in the country, but instead of looking for a dead body, we'd find cool bridges to fish from and camp a little ways off the tracks. Of course, we knew that this was dangerous and we'd likely be trespassing, but we were kids. We had a lot of fun. We did find beautiful rivers, we discovered bridges no one went to, we fished, we hid from trains. At night, we camped in the woods just near the tracks and made small hidden fires. Nothing bad ever happened. It was idyllic. In fact, it was so much fun we did it multiple times. Never had a problem. After high school, me and Joe went our own ways. We both left home, but always stayed in touch and always tried to coordinate visits so we'd see each other occasionally. Well, one summer in the mid-90s, it worked out that we were both in town for about a week. We'd do stuff with the family in the day, and at night we'd either catch drinks at a bar or sit outside Joe's house around a fire and talk about the old days. One night, me and Joe got to talking about our Stand By Me trips. Well, nostalgia and beer are a hell of a mix. Soon, we decided to take a day, walk the rails, camp out one night, and walk home. The day came. We started out early morning. We had my wife drop us off in our old spot where we used to start, right outside our hometown. She thought this was absolutely crazy, and she made sure to mention it. When she pulled away, Joe suggested that instead of taking the usual route, we'd take the opposite direction, just to be adventurous. We knew the land well, we had a map, so I gave a what the hell and off we set. The day went fine. It was fun and a little sad, but in a good way. We found a bridge and sat on the edge, smoked a joint and move on. We had no fishing gear, but we brought some canned food and other stuff. Before night started to set in, we picked a spot to camp. It was a thick forested area, trees on every side of the train tracks, so you feel like you were in a tunnel. We had brought small hammocks to sleep on, but before we set them up, we decided to do a little scouting of the perimeter. Now this is what we used to do in the old days too. We'd walk the area around a little bit to make sure some dude's house wasn't just over a hill and we were actually camping in someone's yard. We'd walked around maybe 100 feet or so into the woods and up a small incline. We figured if we didn't see anything from on top of this short hill, we'd be fine. But when we got to the top, we saw an old building down at the bottom, about 100 yards into the woods. It was barely visible. We pondered over what to do. We both assumed it was a sugar shack or something, because there didn't appear to be a clear road into it. From where we were, there didn't look to be anyone in it either. All was quiet. No movement could be seen. No lights. We decided to walk a little closer just to make sure. We came down the hill very slowly, and as we neared the building, we saw it wasn't a sugar shack at all. It was an old church. It looked like it had been abandoned for years. It was a squat, sagging building whose wooden planks were almost black from years of moss and rot. The cross still stood on top of the place, also weathered black. None of the windows had glass, and there were no doors, just open doorways. We got close enough to see inside. There were rows of pews and a built-up section in the front for a preacher to stand. We didn't go all the way in. We didn't want to. Beyond all that, there was no sign of anyone else. No footprints, no paths, no roads. It was an abandoned church. We left immediately and went back up our hill to the spot we had picked to camp. Having a hill between us and the church made us feel better. We were also still a little bit uneasy. We chalked it up to the natural creepiness seeing a church in the middle of the woods would elicit. Besides, at this point, it was dusk, and we just decided to rig up our hammocks and go to sleep to move on at early morning. Night set in, and as we laid in our hammocks and shot the shit, we began to hear something in the direction of the church. Our conversation went a little bit like this. Do you hear that? What the fuck is that? It sounds like people singing, and it did sound just like singing. We both slid right out of our hammocks and hunkered down, straining to hear more. We listened for a minute or two, and the singing continued, but it wasn't getting any louder. Finally, we decided to creep back up the hill to see if we could spy where the sound was coming from. We could still move very quietly in the woods from the old days. It was second nature to us. The moon was barely out, but it provided enough light so you wouldn't walk right into a tree. However, it was still near pitch black. We didn't use flashlights as we crept slowly up the hill, and we didn't talk. When we got to the top, we saw light in the distance. It was coming from the church. and the singing was coming from inside. Joe and I put our heads close together and had a hushed conversation that boiled down to, "Can you believe this shit?" The light looked to be candlelight from the way it flickered, and though we tried, we couldn't make out what was being sung. It sounded like church music, but in another language. We sat and watched for a while, trying to see who was in there, but we only saw occasional shadows. We had no intention of getting closer either. We had about a football field length between us, and we aimed to keep it that way. The singing continued for a bit, and then it stopped. After that, a booming male voice began to chant. I was already freaked out, but this voice thoroughly scared the shit out of me. It sounded like some Old Testament preacher you'd see in the movies, but again, it was like he was speaking in a different language because we could not understand a single word. Eventually, it got to where the single male voice would say something, and then a bunch of voices would answer it in song. This lasted for a while, and then they all broke out into this long, sustained wail that just kept getting louder. It got so loud and so disturbing that I covered my ears. And then, it all just stopped. At this point, I was just getting ready to say, "Let's get the fuck out of here," when Joe put his hand on my shoulder and hissed, "They're coming out!" We were far enough away that we couldn't make them out really well, but what we could see was a line of figures walk out of an open doorway, all holding hands in single file. We could see some of them had flashlights. They began to sing again, and the light from the flashlights began to move towards us in the hill. We booked it back to our campsite, grabbed our shit, and ran to the tracks. Once there, we ran down the tracks in the direction that we had come from. After a few minutes, we stopped and looked back. We saw lights coming down the hill. They were moving erratically, like whoever was holding them was shaking them. We continued to run in spurts and walk as fast as we could. We eventually stopped seeing the lights and came to a road. By our map, we knew a small town was about 15 minutes down it. And we walked there, got to a 24-hour gas station, and called my wife to come get us. My wife and other friends all thought it was just kids messing around, but I heard those voices, and they sure as hell did not sound like kids to me. Not sure who those people are, but it definitely was the creepiest thing that happened to me out in the woods. This second story is called Man in Forest Kills Animals and Chases After Me While Ringing Bells in the Dark, by Wilhelm Baudelaire. This is truly the scariest, most horrible thing that has ever happened to me. I've never been so petrified in my life. To this day, I still do not know who this man was, what he was trying to do, or if he still is where I saw him. I'm sorry for how long the geographical description is. I just want everyone to understand how secluded I was when this happened, and how badly it could have ended if it wasn't for my parents. I was back home for the summer for the first time in a year after starting university. Our home was, still is, just outside a small town with forests all around. There was also a small man-made lake, which was diverged from a river that ran for miles through the forest and ramified into a few streams east of the lake. Near my home, there was a small grassy path that led to the river following a stream. It was a long walk, but one I used to go on often as a child. I knew the forests there well. I knew where I could cut through the dense trees to meet the stream. And in this forest, it was extremely easy to get lost. And in fact, I never saw anyone else in this forest until this day. The first time I left in the morning, I walked along the path away from the stream to the sharp bend and then cut into the forest. I reached the stream after an hour or so. As I was running my hands in the water, I heard a bell from far away, coming from the north. Something was making a bell ring fervently and periodically, which I found strange. I listened well, wondered if it was a lost hunting dog, and started moving towards the sound. And before I get any comments, I know that this was an awful idea, but I was already heading that way, so what the hell. I realized it couldn't have been an animal. I could tell the bell was clearly too heavy to be on a collar because of how clear the sound was. I kept moving, and the bell was moving away from me. It stopped completely after 5 minutes. The stream wasn't big enough or strong enough to carry a bell. And the river was still too far away. I thought of everything, but nothing explained the sound, apart from one obvious thing, which I didn't feel comfortable with. I knew it had to be a person. I stopped thinking about it and just walked on normally, until I found a badger. A blooming dead one, carefully decapitated. It had obviously been done with a knife. It was fairly fresh, the body was still limp, and there wasn't too much smell coming from it. The wound was full of maggots, but I knew that happened soon after exposure. The sound of the bell had been following the stream. So had I. So, the badger was put there, maybe killed there, at least decapitated, and all the while I was walking that way. Nothing else happened that day. However, 1 week later, I went back for the second time that summer and the last time ever. I left home around 6 p.m. I made it to the stream, then walked to the river in an hour. Then I decided to go back the way I came because it was getting late and it was raining quite heavily. The sun set at around 9 p.m. I was walking as fast as I could. The sound of the rain in the trees was surreal and loud. I was somewhat trotting with my head down for a while, through the clearest and most open part of the forest, when I bumped into something heavy. The smell was sickly. It was the decomposing body of the badger, with its head strung to its front paws. That area looked a bit like a ham because of the way it was tied, just swinging from a tree. It was this putrid bag of stench, wet and dripping green liquid. I started gagging. I had some sort of mucus texture fluid in my hair. It was repulsive. At first, I just stared at it, slightly gobsmacked. Then I started fidgeting violently because I felt like I was drenched in its juices. However, I was just soaking from the rain, so my senses were slightly confused. It felt like a bucket of ice-cold water had been thrown over me when I realized I walked the same way to get to the river, so someone had strung up the body after I passed it on the way up here. Someone knew I'd see it. So, was someone watching me and running around the forest? Were the faint sounds of branches breaking around me not animals? I looked around briefly and started jogging. I was half running, half walking, away from the stream back towards the path for a while, when I heard the bell again. I proceeded to call my dad when I ran. I told him to meet me on the path where it sharply turns west. It was the closest part of the path to me. I told him to go as fast as he could, and that someone was in the forest with me. I can't explain the feeling I had. It was like I just shit out my intestines and stomach. I literally felt the hairs on my neck raise, despite being soaked. It was dark. I jogged out as fast as I could. I was panicking because the path was still a bit far away, just too far to feel safe. It was still raining. Every single sound was muffled. I felt like everything was further away than ever before. The bell went on for way longer than last time, on and off. I felt like it was surrounding me at one point. The fear combined with my compromised hearing and the fact that I couldn't flip and breathe properly was making me slightly lose my sense of direction. I was automatically heading southwest, but I wasn't really sure what I was even doing. I was breathing like a goddamn horse, coughing my lungs up, kind of crying out loud like a toddler does, tripping over leaves and twigs like an idiot. I stayed on the phone with my mom, who was on her way with my dad. I kept hearing sounds, but I wasn't sure what they were. My mom was screaming on the phone, saying that they were on the path and that I needed to run, that my dad had gotten out, and that he was heading east from the path bend. I was terrified, so I went into survival mode. I was doing the half running, half speed walking thing again because I was out of breath. Then I heard branches break. Clear footsteps for the first time from down in the forest, and the bell ringing louder. I didn't want to, but I looked over my shoulder. That is when I saw what was in this forest with me. A tall figure creeping in my direction at the very end of the clearing, ringing this bell slowly in front of his stomach. I could tell he was staring straight at me. Now I don't know if I had a hidden secret sprinting ability or instinctual adrenaline-induced superhuman powers, but when I tell you I ran for my life, I fucking didn't look back once. I screamed as much as I could. I lied. I'm on the phone with the police. They are on the path. Dad, I can see you. I'm here. I wanted to yell, Dad, please, where are you? But I kept that to myself. I felt like something awful was going to happen. I felt like the man was right behind me. I kept telling myself not to look back. I was gasping and wheezing, crying so hard and screaming for my dad. I felt shivers on my neck, and then switched off. I just ran. I even dropped my bag and only realized I didn't have it anymore when I was in the car. I felt like my phone was the only way home. Things no longer felt real. It was like my legs were moving by themselves. I didn't know if the man was still following me. I could only hear my heart beating in my ears and the bell. When I finally heard my dad shout my name, I knew that he was coming my way because of the intonation in his voice. I pretty much lunged myself at him when we got together. My dad heard the bell too. My mom could hear it on the phone. She was waiting with the car ready to leave fast.